Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. So there were some tangents taken during the press briefings over the weekend, the task force press briefings about President Trump relieving two individuals of their duties, the Inspector General for the intelligence community, Michael Atkinson, as well as the commander in charge of the USS Roosevelt. We'll get to each in turn. First, Atkinson. Trump was asked about firing Atkinson on Saturday, and here's what he had to say about Mr. Atkinson and the decision he made.
I thought he did a terrible job, absolutely terrible. He took a whistleblower report, which turned out to be a fake report. It was fake. It was totally wrong. It was about my conversation with the president of Ukraine. He took a fake report, and he brought it to Congress with an emergency, okay? Not a big Trump fan, that I can tell you. Instead of saying, and we offered this to him, no, we will take the conversation where fortunately we had a transcript. If we didn't have a transcript with the kind of deception and dishonesty that were practiced by the Democrats, I might not be standing here right now, okay? Fortunately, we had a transcript, and it was a perfect transcript because even the lieutenant colonel admitted it was correct. By the way, President of Ukraine, foreign minister, said he did nothing wrong. And over that, with 196 to nothing vote by the Republicans, not one dissenting Republican vote, dishonest Democrats impeached a president of the United States. That man is a disgrace to IGs. You know who the whistleblower is, and so do you, and so does everybody in this room, and so do I. Everybody knows, but they give this whistleblower a status that he doesn't deserve. He's a fake whistleblower. And frankly, somebody ought to sue his ass off. All right, it's enough of the whistleblower. Go ahead, please.
So not backing down on that decision, as you heard, in no uncertain terms. Let's start there on IG Atkinson and Captain Crozier with our friend Lieutenant Colonel James Carafano, Vice President of the Catherine Shelby Cullum Davis Institute for International Studies at the Heritage Foundation, author of books including Wiki at War, Private Sector Public Wars. Jim, thanks for joining us.
I think Harry Truman just lost his status as the most plain-spoken president of all times.
Yeah. Well, let's start with Atkinson. Was it a fair, I mean, obviously it was within his power to do so. Was it the right decision?
Well, I think the president made the case that a very senior inspector general in a very, very important decision exercised very, very poor judgment that caused an enormous amount of disruption. And if you're not a competent public servant, you shouldn't keep your job. I mean, I think that's fundamentally the president's argument.
Yeah, but Democrats immediately cried foul, accusing Trump of retaliation. Has that come as any surprise?
Well, no, of course it doesn't come as any surprise. I mean, we have the most partisan environment in Washington in recorded memory. I mean, even here we are in the middle of the COVID-19 crisis. And you still see very, very partisan comments from both sides on issues, even when we're arguably in the gravest crisis since Pearl Harbor. So I don't think anybody's surprised.
What about Captain Crozier of the USS Theodore Roosevelt, who was relieved of his duty for sending out a letter about coronavirus infection on his ship that was distributed through unclassified channels, that was distributed to a couple of dozen people and ultimately leaked to the San Francisco Chronicle?
I'm usually very reticent or reluctant to comment on cases like this because I'm not presented with all the facts in front of me. I was in the military for 25 years, and I was never in combat, but I was in some pretty tough situations, including a situation where we were out in the middle of winter training, and we just had an enormous outbreak of trench foot and cold injuries, and dealing with that and talking to the chain of command. So I've been in situations that remind me of that. I have to say, the facts as presented by the president in the outbrief and as presented by the Secretary of Defense and Secretary of Navy, I don't have a lot of sympathy for the captain. There is a chain of command. I didn't see the emergency that the chain of command needed to be circumvented, and essentially to if this is true, release his claims to the public out of the chain of command when none of the crew were critically ill, when he still had plenty of crew to operate the ship. I'm not sympathetic for the captain, quite honestly.
New York Times reported over the weekend that 430,000 people arrived in the United States on direct flights from China, including nearly 40,000 in the 2 months after Trump imposed travel restrictions. The bulk of the passengers arrived in January: L.A., San Fran, New York, Chicago, Seattle, Newark, Detroit. Thousands of them flew directly from Wuhan. This continues to fuel what you're hearing from politicians, particularly in Republicans in the Senate, about the need for a China investigation in China, about the need for reconsideration of our funding of the World Health Organization, of a need for reconsideration of private enterprises' supply chains in China, of a reconsideration of everything America and China related.
Well, that's a lot of ground to cover. Let me offer two comments. First of all, on how the Chinese actually behave. We have a report out today by one of our analysts, Olivia Enos. It's on our website, heritage.org, where she went through and documented all the publicly available information, where the Chinese were not just bad with the rest of the world, but documenting how they restrained and complicated and limited the response in their own country to keep their citizens, take care of their citizens. So the Chinese do have an awful lot to be responsible for. On the World Health Organization, I think that takes, let's just pause a minute on that one. Last year, we gave $400 million to the World Health Organization. That was twice as much as the next largest competitor. China gave $40 million. So take a zero off of there. They're actually a very mediocre contributor to international organizations. On the other hand, the Chinese have over 1,000 employees in the UN and international organizations. Every single one of them is responsible to the Chinese Communist Party. So from a monetary standpoint and a support standpoint, the U.S. remains by far the global leader of supporting international organizations which are supposed to be doing useful things, like the World Health Organization, the National Civil Aviation, the National Maritime Organization. But we have, for a decade, really been kind of asleep at the switch, where the Chinese have essentially infiltrated these organizations and have shifted the purpose of the organizations to support China's interests and China's claims, as opposed to actually being organizations to coordinate organizations between states. I think that's bad on us. If you actually look at this administration in the last, I would say, 2 years, they've actually been starting to turn a corner on that. There was a very important election not long ago for WIPO, which is the World International Property Organization. Essentially, they coordinate patents worldwide. And the U.S. woke up one day and said that the Chinese had a candidate. I mean, the world's leading intellectual property thief had a candidate to head the World Intellectual Property Organization. It's like James Dillinger, a bank robber, wanted to put somebody on the bank board, and so the United States needs to up its game in this area in particular.
Well, how do you suggest we do that?
Well, there's a lot we can do, and our traditional way of doing that is just we don't play, so we withdraw our support from an organization and we don't engage with them. But I don't think that's enough. For example, China just got voted on the Human Rights Council. Here they've committed one of the grossest human rights violation in modern time, and they get voted on the Human Rights Council. Another good example is the International Criminal Court. We're not a member of the International Criminal Court. Now they're trying to investigate U.S. military in Afghanistan, which they have no authority to do. What the administration has done is shifted its policy from ignoring them to actually going after these guys. And so, for example, denying them visas to come to the United States and finding other ways to do this. So we have to push for good candidates for election in international organizations. We have to hold organizations accountable that we give money to, and we have to name and shame organizations that are not acting in the public interest.
What about triangulating some of the countries that had relationships with China to reestablish stronger bonds? For example, Italy and their alliance with China to bring over so many Chinese migrant workers. Well, the Italian PM Giuseppe Conte was on Meet the Press over the weekend, restating his thanks and appreciation for both President Trump and America in terms of helping them with responding to the outbreak in Italy, in northern Italy in particular. It seems to me you have obviously the UK is apoplectic about
Right.
China. So it seems like there's opportunities here with respect to even our erstwhile allies to forge stronger bonds.
I think that's absolutely correct. China's brand has been sullied largely because of things China has done. The U.S. has a tremendous opportunity to re-engage with not just traditional allies, but with countries that are on the fence and say, look, we need to be realistic and pragmatic about how we deal with China and just quit wishing, we had the nice panda bear we'd all want, as opposed to having a very aggressive, very untrustworthy, very mendacious international partner.
And does that mean also, if not governmental action, public pressure on private actors, whether it's big pharma companies or it's the NBA or Hollywood, as it pertains to the Chinese market?
Well, I think, first of all, I think transparency is the number one tool. If people see what the Chinese are doing, people will make better decisions. And I do think that the marketplace is when they look at China now, they recognize we have to do business differently, that we have to look at risk in dealing with China very differently than the past. It's not just dollars and cents. It's property theft. It's their behavior. It's their lack of respect for the rule of law. It's their tremendous abuse of human rights, their use of slave labor. So I do think companies will look at China differently. But we're not going to, I think being realistic, we're not going to completely disengage with China. But I think it is really advantage U.S. China needs to export. China needs to grow. China needs to sell people stuff. So they're in a tough spot here, and I think the president has a lot of leverage in future dealing with China to really, really bend them on what their behavior is. We say we got to bend the curve and we got to get Americans back to work. As soon as we do that, we've got to go out in the world and start really pressing the advantage in foreign policy that we have, because everybody has been hit by this thing. And we have to reset the table.
He is Lieutenant
Colonel.
Colonel.
We will be one of the stronger players, and we need. The president's always said we need to, protect our interests. Well, the time is going to be the day after. That's going to be the best time to do that.
Lieutenant Colonel Jim Carafano, VP of the Catherine and Shelby Cullum Davis Institute for International Studies at the Heritage Foundation. Jim, thanks as always for your insights. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Take care.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect with Dan and Amy using the AM560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
During this unprecedented time, the need is great. That's why Illinois broadcasters are uniting against hunger. You can help the Greater Chicago Food Depository and the Northern Illinois Food Bank without even leaving your home. Make a simple donation at feedingillinois.org/unite, or you can text FEEDIL to 91999. And your generous gift will help make sure families in our communities have enough to eat. Join Illinois broadcasters uniting against hunger. Together, we can make a difference.
Oh, in these uncertain times, it is hard not to be anxious and stressed out, and that affects your immune